All right, I am Keith Straka, and this is Dances of the Honeybee. I've been beekeeping for 5 seasons now. I'm the vice president for Mon County Bee Club, going on 2 years. I live in Fairmount, West Virginia with my wife Miriam and 2 kids, Eva and Ivan. Our favorite pastime activity would definitely be spending time in our beautiful Appalachian Mountains. So before we get started, Dances of the Honeybee, I would like to take a few minutes to talk about my bee season review. I attended the Western Pennsylvania Conference almost 2 years ago and got to see Randy Oliver do several presentations. And before one of them, he talked about his year in review. I thought, wow, what a great idea. Thank you, Randy. I always think it's nice to hear from other beekeepers what they are seeing and doing to give me a larger perspective of what the bees are doing around me. So in 2020, bee season in review, I like to mark when I'm seeing everything bloom. So see how I've listed out in March all the way up through September, all the different bloom periods of the different nectar fruits. So I started feeding a pollen substitute in early March this year and did my first inspections on March 9th. It was just starting to warm up. It was 67 degrees this day and yellow pollen was coming in. It was the start of my bee season. We had a nice bloom through March and early April, but it was still cold and wet through some of our major nectar blooms, including autumn walnuts. Because of this, my bees did not bring in a surplus of nectar from this flow. We had a late frost in April that whipped up a tulip poplar bloom, which obviously ruined that nectar flow. In between all the rain and cold weather, I got behind on inspections. I had my first swarm on April 17th, and from being behind from the weather, I had 7 out of 25 swarms, 5 swarm. Felt like we were rounding the corner from May with the bloom of the wet clover that just seemed to be everywhere and last forever. But I only had about a 50% mating success from all the bad weather that we had. It took a second attempt for me to get all my new queen cells, get my new queens out and get them mated. So finally, by the sourwood flow in July, I was able to finally capitalize on the nectar flow.
It's in and out. I lose the.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but it's just like you're in and out. And my volume's all the way up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All
I mean,
right.
I can hear you. It's just like it's like a muffled sound.
Even now?
Well, I don't know. You have to talk for a while. Go ahead.
All right. So compared to last year, we had a beautiful spring that warmed up immediately and stayed warm. We were pulling honey supers last year by the beginning of June. It's been a beautiful fall, and by the smell and weight of my hives, it's been a good goldenrod season. I've recently started packing the girls in for winter by getting supers taken off, feeding where needed, taking off queen excluders, and so on. I hope everyone has at least had the satisfaction of getting to eat some honey out of their hives this year. So now on to our main topic tonight, which is dance language. Tonight, we'll be taking a look at the different dances a bee uses: the waggle dance, the tremble dance, and the vibration dance. It has traditionally been thought that the main way in which honeybees achieve a proper labor allocation is the adoption of different jobs given to bees at different ages. When you study the colony labor profile, one would see a general pattern of bees of different ages specializing in different tasks. What I'm going to show tonight is how honeybees, through the tremble dance and the vibration dance, can stimulate bees to move to where the colony's labor needs are the greatest. The process, which is referred to as foraging for work, is based on 3 assumptions. Assumption number 1, each worker actively seeks work and will switch to a nearby task when it fails to find work in its current role. Number 2, tasks are arranged in a common place within the nest. Number 3, workers are born into the first task, which is located in the nest center. What this is basically saying is the birth of a young worker increases the labor supply in the nest center where it was born. This passively displaces the next older workers to the next work zone, which in turn boosts the labor supply for the zone, causing the still older workers to move outward and so on until the effects reach the outermost work zone, which is the outside environment. This is where the oldest workers are working, foraging until their death. So one way the honeybee does this is through a dance language. Karl von Frisch, who specialized in insect behavior and in 1967 showed that bees can navigate by the sun and perform dances to communicate to other members of their hive the location of food services. He went on to win the Nobel Prize in 1973 for this discovery. As we go over the dances, you'll see how effective honeybees are at communicating a lot of different needs and where these needs are located in the honeybee's environment. We will also look at how they are using these specific dances to relay this information to the rest of the hive. The information that is being processed in the waggle dance is location of the nectar and pollen sources, the profitability of these food sources, and the location of a new hive when swarming. What is the waggle dance? The waggle dance is a unique behavior in which a bee, being inside her colony's hive, performs a miniaturized reenactment of her recent journey to a patch of flowers. By communicating the direction and the distance to other bees, she is mapping out the source of pollen that she is located. So who does the dance? The dance is done by the forager bee that starts this process by first going out and gathering the information. Every time a forager bee comes back to her hive from a flower, she brings with her not only a honey sac full of nectar and her hind legs loaded with pollen, but also that information about the food source stored in her brain. She shares this information with the rest of the hive through the waggle dance. The hive is acquiring its information about all the food sources from its foragers that are actively gathering food. So a normal colony will have an estimate of 25% of the hive engaged in food collection. That comes out to 6,000. So a normal colony of 25,000 bees will have an estimate of 25% of the hive engaged in food collection. That comes out to 6,250 bees that are out working as foragers. These foragers are using information that could be hours or even days old to work dozens of different flower patches located around. Only a small fraction of the foragers are out looking for new flower patches. So these bees, which are also referred to as scout bees, are either just starting their new job as foragers or are old forager bees that have abandoned their flower patches because it's been depleted of all the nectar and the pollen. So the actual way in which scout bees conduct the search for new food sources has not been discovered yet by scientists. A few of the things that are still being studied by these scientists to figure out are the actual patterns the scout bees are using to explore the new areas and how much area a bee can explore in a given amount of time. So once the forager bee returns back to the hive, they're all carrying the information about their specific flower patch. The cool thing here is the bees can actually determine how rich of a food source they have found, and based on that information, they start to relay the information to the rest of the hive. So the bees know whether it's carrying profitable information that is worth telling everyone else in the hive through the waggle dance. So based off of, you have 25% of your hive out there as foragers, they're not all coming back and doing the waggle dance. It's only the ones that know that they have a highly profitable food source, that they're the ones that are going to come back and share that information with the rest of the hive. So the foragers, they do not run throughout the hive sharing the information, but what they do instead is what they refer to as the dance floor that is located just within the hive entrance. So the forager has now returned to the hive. and she's excited about the quality of the food source she has. So she makes her way to the dance floor and starts the waggle dance. So in this example, we will make her food source a large patch of flowers that's located 1,500 meters from the hive and a line running at 40 degrees to the right of her hive that is between her and the nest of the sun that you can see in the picture. So on the dance floor, which is just a frame of comb inside the entrance, she's performing the waggle dance as a way to entice other foragers to gather the food source that she has found. She runs through a small figure-8 pattern followed by a waggle run, a turn to the right to circle back to the starting point, another waggle run followed by a turn and circle to the left. The dance continues in this pattern with regular alternating turns to the left and right after the waggle run that is 40 degrees to the right of the current positioning of the sun. So you can see in the picture how it's the 40 degrees based off the positioning of the sun and how she's working on the vertical cone. So as the day progresses, the position of the sun obviously changes too, as would the 40 degrees. So if the bees continue to recruit for this patch of flowers all day long, then that angle is continuously going to change based off of the positioning of the sun wherever it is in the sky. So here you can see the actual waggle dance of the bee. This isn't in correlation to the 40-degree line we were using in our example, it's just to show the movement of the dance. So you can see the waggle run right here. She turns to the left. The waggle run again, she turns to the right as she continues in the figure-8 with the waggle run in the middle. So the actual waggle run of the dance is the most important part of the dance, paying attention to both the vigor of the waggle that is coming at its strongest from the tip of her abdomen and then vibrating from her wings at around 260 to 300 hertz. During the dance, other members of the hive will move along behind her with their antennas also extended toward her. So if you can just picture them coming up behind the bee with their antennas like arms, putting those antennas onto the bee in order to feel her. So these followers are using their antenna to detect the sound of the vibration. The distance of the flower patch from the hive is expressed through the duration of the waggle run. So the bees following behind her are using their antennas to detect the sound of the buzz from her wings during the waggle to measure the amount of time she is waggling for. So if we were to have an observation hive and we were watching the honeybee do the waggle dance, we would need to use a stopwatch to time the bee during the waggle part of the dance to determine the distance to the flower patch. The bees, in turn, are using their antennas as feelers to be able to determine the time of the dance to figure out the distance. So the distance between the nest and the flower patch is expressed through the duration of the waggle run. The farther the target, the longer the waggle run. And this rate will increase around 75 milliseconds per 100 meters. So in our example, if it was 1,500 meters away, it would be 1,125 milliseconds or 1.125 seconds. So as if this wasn't enough information to give to all the other bees that the forager is communicating with, she also relays the odor of the flowers. So when she comes back in, she's doing the waggle dance. During the waggle dance, the scent is partly carried back in the forager's waxy cuticle, but most of the smell is coming from the actual food. So either the pollen that is on her hind legs or the nectar that she's actually regurgitating during the dance to the other followers lets them know. So now the bees know the direction of the food, they know the distance it is from the hive, and they know what it smells like. So the varying duration of the waggle is what shows the other foragers the quality of the food source. So several scientists, including Tom Seeley, have done experiments that involved watching the bees collect two different sugar water food sources that were quite different in profitability. So obviously they would have a very strong one and a very weak one. The evidence that they have found is that the bees rely principally, if not completely, on the strength of the dance signal duration to express information about nectar source profitability. The longer they dance, the more profitable the food source. What I find to be the most interesting behavior here is the ability for a bee to even figure out that the food source is more profitable. I'd like to know how a bee even figures out the threshold of what is profitable and what is not. Because if you're starting as a forager, it's not like you've been doing it long enough to be able to figure this out. So, but the bees, they take this even further. So studies have shown that not only can a bee figure out how profitable a food source is, but they can also take into account how much energy they must expend to collect that food source compared to less profitable food sources that are located closer to them that would take less energy to collect. They can then determine which food source makes the most sense to collect based on their data. The seemingly endless complex behaviors of the honeybee blows my mind. So bees using the same intensity when choosing a new nest site when swarming. So honeybee scouts will fly out and find the nest cavities that are available. They then return to the swarming cluster of bees and use the waggle dance to try to recruit other scout bees to the specific nest site they have found. The intensity of their dance is what recruits the other scouts to listen to them and make the decisions to go and check it out for themselves. The listening scout bee will then fly out, check out the possible sites, and if it is better than the ones that they've come across, then they will help spread the word by coming back and performing the waggle dance to communicate this site's direction to the other bees. And once there are enough scout bees dancing in favor of the most desirable nest site, the swarm then moves off to occupy their new home. A great book that covers all the experiments and shows how we can learn to make better group decisions if we look at honeybees as an example is Tom Seeley's Honeybees for Democracy. All right, so the round dance. So I'm going to briefly mention the round dance tonight just to clarify the data that we now have. So the round dance was once thought of as being like the waggle dance, but it was used by the bees to show the same information of food sources located closer to the hive. So it just informed the other bees that a food source is available nearby. Now, a study done by Kirchner, Lindor, and Mickelson revealed that the distinction between round and waggle dance is artificial. They showed the information about distance and direction is coded in all recruitment dances, regardless of the distance to the food. It should now just be referred to as the waggle dance, as the food source at short distances are still determined by the waggle runs, but do not provide precise information about the location of the hive. So moving on to the tremble dance. So what is the tremble dance used to communicate? It's used for the bees to communicate the need for more foragers. So now that the hive is on a nectar flow and foragers are hard at work gathering food from the most profitable flower pouches based on their locations from the hive must coordinate the actions of the collection and the processing of the nectar. So you have all your bees flying out and they're bringing back in the nectar. They're doing the waggle dance and they're telling the other bees, the other foragers, where this nectar is located. Inside the hive, you have the younger bees that are hard at work processing this nectar. So these foragers are flying back in and they're passing off the nectar to these young bees that are in turn going and storing the bee in the combs or passing it on to other hungry hive members. So based on the time of day, the bloom period, and even the weather, these flower patches can vary in nectar production from day to day and even hour to hour. So in order for the bees to maximize their nectar collection by the foragers outside the hive and the processing of this nectar inside the hives by these young bees, they must stay in constant balance to maximize the gathering and storing of the nectar. If you have too many foragers collecting nectar, when they return to the hive, they must wait on a bee to come and pass on their nectar. So now we'll take a look and we'll see what the dance looks like. So what's going to happen here is the forager bee comes in, and if she's waiting too long to pass on her nectar, she starts the tremble dance. So the tremble dance is her shaking her body back and forth, at the same time rotating her body axis by about 50 degrees every second or two, all the while walking slowly across the cone. The dance will last on average 30 minutes, and the bees travel throughout the brood nest of the hive where the waggle run was located just on the combs close to the entrance. We will take a look at what this looks like.
Can you point to her with your mouse? I missed it. Gotcha.
All right. So this dance can be broken down into three parts. The first component of the dance is the vibrational, which has the body of the bee moving side to side and sometimes front to back. The second part is the rotational, which has the body constantly changing directions. The third part is translational, which is the bee walking slowly forward across the cone. The frequency has been recorded as being the same as the waggle dance. In the waggle dance, the abdomen shakes back and forth around a pivot point. In the tremble dance, the bee's entire body shakes with no pivot point at all. So an interesting point to call out here too is that there are times when the tremble dance is happening on the dance floor, where it usually starts. Around the bees doing the waggle dance, it's been shown that the bees doing the tremble dance will actually lunge forward and butt her head against another bee. At the same time, she uses her flight muscles to make a sound that has a frequency of 320 hertz and lasts up to 100 milliseconds. The bees doing the waggle dance, tremble dance, and bees receiving nectar from other bees were usually the targets of these headbutts. So I don't know of any studies that have proven exactly why the bees are doing this, but some scientists have suggested that it's a warning that they're giving to the other bees that are foraging because of predators that might be out there or even poison nectar. So experiments have also shown that the hive has shown that after the dance, the hive has a rise in a colony's nectar processing capacity and a drop in a colony's recruitment of additional bees to nectar sources. So the dance is thus telling the bees inside the hive that they should be changing their work duty to task of processing nectar, and the bees outside the hive that are the foragers get the message and is translating it into I should refrain from recruiting any additional forages to my nectar source with the waggle dance. So the fact that the tremble dancer moves away from the dance floor and goes throughout the brood nest shows us the intended audience for the dance. So by her going throughout the brood nest, she's enlisting the help of younger bees that are partaking in brood care or just inactive in the hive. So these bees now make up the workforce needed to process the nectar. Based off experiments, it's been proven too that we can now see how honeybee foragers returning to the hive after finding a highly profitable nectar source and finding a honeybee food store within 20 seconds will do a waggle dance. So then if that forager comes back to the hive and it takes longer than 50 seconds or more to find a nectar processor, that's when they'll perform the tremble dance. So that's the difference between it. So the balance that the bees are able to display in the foraging of nectar and processing is amazing. Not only are they balancing the nectar intake and distribution, but on top of that, they still have other competing needs inside the hive for labor with different jobs. So the last dance that we're going to talk about tonight is the vibration dance. So the vibration dance is used by the forager bees to stimulate non-forager bees to move onto the dance floor and become foragers. So the forager honeybee will vibrate its abdomen while holding on to another bee, and it's also referred to as the shaking signal. Here's an example. So a bee, so what she's doing is she's vibrating her whole body at about 16 hertz for 1 to 2 seconds, usually while grasping another bee with her legs. So after producing one such shaking signal, the bee will typically crawl a short distance across the comb and soon shake another bee. Bees show great variation in the frequency and the number of signals produced in a row. The bees that receive the shaking signal simply stand motionless until released by the shaker. So this is also used to communicate the need for more foragers and also when there's a need for food. And it's usually done whenever there's a heavy nectar flow going on. So evidence has shown that this shaking signal serves to boost the number of bees engaged in foraging at times of abundant forage or of great need for food or both. Bees as young as 10 to 14 days have been shown to become foragers after being shaken by these bees. So it's not, when you have these foragers that are at their, like they're at the end of their life and they're out, and then you have bees that are processing this nectar, it's still these younger bees that are in the hive that are coming out and becoming foragers and taking on these different job responsibilities regardless of the age. So before, when we used to say that bees would do certain jobs based off of their age, they're born into that, but it's also about what the hive needs during certain times of the year. So bees will take advantage of heavy nectar flows and they'll use these younger bees. It's not like they're using all the bees that are at the end of their life in order to maximize the honey flow. They'll use all the bees in the hive and take advantage of what's given to them. So the honeybee colonies, when foraging, they use the waggle, the tremble, and the vibration dances as signals to communicate to the other bees. There are also many cues inside the hive. These cues include search time to locate the nectar receiver, nectar influx, the presence of empty pollen cells, and more. So these cues will and have evolved more readily than the signals because the cues involve only the formation of an adaptive response to a pre-existing stimulus, whereas the evolution of the dance signal involves the adaptation of both the signal given from the dance and the response of it. So it's a lot more complicated for it to evolve with the bees. So, but here's an interesting fact too, is that the dance signals may have evolved because there were no cues to express the information to be conveyed. So if it's as easy as putting a cue in there for a bee to be able to realize something, like that's easy. But if there's no cues available for these bees, and the waggle dance is one of those ways in which it's evolved because there are no cues to tell a forager where a food source is located. So it's too complicated of a message to be able to put in the form of a cue. So a dance signal has evolved to make up for that. So these behaviors are quite remarkable when you see how one bee can come back from a profitable flower patch and relay so much information to the rest of the hive. For me, it's nice to know that my honeybee addiction can be a lifelong journey of trying to understand all these complex behaviors of the bees. So I just want to say thank you for everybody for attending, and if there's any questions, then let them rip.
Okay, so in the vibration dance, like is the bee that's doing the vibration dance literally like grabbing another bee and shaking her and saying like, "Come with me"?
Yep. Yeah. It's like the attention getter. Like they're grabbing a hold of them and saying, "Hey, we need more foragers." So it's almost like it's taking it to the next step. Like they're coming back and they're doing a waggle dance. But for me, it's like I'm looking at them. Okay, like you have these bees that. It's just kind of like people where it's like you come back and you tell them something and they just sit there and stare at you. So like you have some people that are like, oh, okay, we got to do this. And the rest of them are still sitting on the bench, you know? So she goes over to those ones, she's shaking them, saying, come on, get with it, come on. So that's the way that they're maximizing the workforce. So they're making sure like, okay, you might have worked hard and it might even be a bee that's in there like sleeping for a couple hours or something, you know? So, come on, let's go.
We're done.
All right. Well, thank you for attending. I hope you got to have a nice couple dances.
Oh, one more thing. It's dark in the hive, isn't it? When they're doing these dances.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's no reliance on being able to see other bees. Like you're just basically feeling these dances, right?
That's why, like, if we were to take an observation hive and look at the waggle run, like, we could use a stopwatch in order to say, okay, here's how long it is. That's why when the bees are doing the dance, what happens is you have the dance followers that come up to the bee, and she's doing the dance pretty much right on top of them, and they come up right behind her. And I think it was like if we were all in the dark and we were trying to figure out what was going on and we have our arms out, well, think of it as the bee has their antennas out and they're using these antennas like arms to feel around, and they can feel that vibration. So she's vibrating, like they can tell the duration of that dance and that timing of it based off of them being able to feel that. So yeah, and that's why it's pretty incredible, because they always know based off of when they fly out and come back, they always know the positioning of the sun. So when they come back, it's always based off of where that positioning of the sun is. So it would always change relative to the parent planet.
When you talked about profitability, is that another way of saying like the nutritious value of what they're collecting?
Yeah.
Does
Yeah,
it?
so the concentration, the sugar concentration. So a bee can discern the profitability of the nectar source. So obviously the higher the sugar content, the higher the profitability of it. So the higher the sugar content, the less water content that's in it. So whenever it's a higher sugar content like that, they can bring it back, and it's just it's higher as far as profitability to them whenever they get that. So they know they can discern between higher and lower profitability.
Does it also take into account the cost of getting to that source?
Yes.
And bringing
Yeah,
it
so that's what I talked about. So when you have a honeybee, whenever, let's say that it's flying, there's a really high sugar concentrated flower patch that's a mile away from them. Well, let's say that there's a lower sugar content that's a half a mile away from them. Well, they can determine whether they should be going after a mile away or half a mile away based off the energy that they would have to expend going a mile away for the higher concentrate compared to the lower concentrated one that is a half mile closer. So to them, not only can they figure out the profitability of the sugar concentration and where they should be going, but they can also figure out the energy expenditure based off of the distance from the hive and put that into the equation and know whether they should be going a half mile from the hive or a mile from the hive based off of that. Which is incredible to me, because it's like, it's okay if you throw one variable in there and they can figure that out, then I think that's pretty smart. But when you can put two variables in there and have it to where not only is it the probability of the concentrate of the sugar, but actually the expenditure of the energy to go to that source, like, that's absolutely amazing that they can figure that out.
Yeah, that's real cool.
Yeah, I mean, I would be able to say that they're better at math than most people.
No doubt. For sure. And then who was there was a book you mentioned from Tom someone, but I didn't hear you.
Tom Seeley. So Tom Seeley's done Wisdom of the Hive. He's done Honeybee Democracy. He's so the swarming one was the Honeybee Democracy, is the one that I mentioned in there. But any book from Tom Seeley is a good book.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and everybody have a wonderful evening.